Hello and welcome back to the channel, everybody. My name is Dark Sage Walker, and today we are going to start doing what I had said of what I was talking about earlier, which is the class-based builds. Now, I'm sure you've already seen the title of this particular one, and today we are going with the fighter. Why I chose to name the fighter Bertram is anyone's guess. But yes, today we are doing the fighter archetype, which of course, as I'm sure you may have guessed, the fighter is basically your martial weapons expert. Oh, pardon me. Apparently I'm a sleepy boy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're just quintessentially always just the strength-based bruiser, as half the time that's reserved for the barbarian, but we're not doing the barbarian today. So, we're going to be basing this off of essentially a generalized fighter, but let's also keep in mind that this is Wizard of Legend, and not everything is going to be just going to be straight weapons. Case in point, none of the dashes really are what I would consider to be just a straight fighter affair. With the exception of maybe Wavefront, because that's kind of like a shield, but that's also why I chose Aegis Charge. So I think what I'm going to do is we are going to do what emulates a tackle best. Actually, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and do that? But I do think the Chrono Glove is best used as our starting relic. So we've got swords, we've got shields, we've got good old body blows. And actually, if I think about that a little bit more, we can maybe save the body blow for later when I do something like, oh, I don't know, Monk. So perhaps what we choose instead is we'll choose Tunneling Drive, because that's kind of like thrown weapons. Like, I'm kind of grasping at straws here, so forgive me if this doesn't seem like the most fighter-like build. But at the same time, you could always view this as being like, you know, an Eldritch Knight. And that class, or I should say subclass, since that comes from the 5th edition Player's Handbook of Dungeons & Dragons. That class is what I've always known as either a Magic Knight or like a Magic Swordsman. Or in Final Fantasy, starting in Final Fantasy V, they called it the Mystic Knight. But either way, it's very much a similar idea. It is a combination of the martial prowess of a fighter. So, you know, combat maneuvers, you know, high HP and armor use and all of that, along with some form of spell casting. Now, they don't get the full range of spells like wizards do, but they are capable of using some spells, and my controller seems very sensitive today. I hope that doesn't become an issue later. Spoiler, Dark Sage, it'll be an issue later. Ah, shucks. You know it's an issue right now? Not getting my retro floor plan. Come on. Oh, this is getting frustrating. I don't want to front load the entire I don't want to front load the entire talk of what a fighter is, like, right up front here. Thank you. He's just making me feel all sorts of awkward here. Now, is there a particular spot that I would like to start at? I'm going to say we're going to want to start with Freya, just because she's going to be the one that's going to be most resistant to freeze. So this is more about best dealing with the one that's going to resist my main status effect, because I'm using that as a heavy source of control. Now, the reason why I chose the Arcana that I did is because, for the most part, this is what you think of when you think of a fighter, is someone wielding melee weapons in a more skilled fashion, and using their knowledge of combat tactics and battle prowess to get the job done. Like, when it comes, like, as I had mentioned earlier, when it comes to physical combat, they're not necessarily the powerhouses. Like, when you think of what a fighter is, you're thinking more so like trained warriors and soldiers. Like, you're thinking of people like knights and whatnot. I'm not necessarily seeing anything here that I want, and that's disappointing. And that's kind of the big reason why I chose some of the skills that I did. Is because we're looking for things that will make this idea of being a close-range martial fighter easier. And yes, that includes tunneling drive, because I wanted something that would best... Hold on. I wanted something that would emulate a thrown weapon or something along those lines, but would be... Okay, well, I don't want to give up my shield bash, so I'm not going to be using Nocturne services. Lame. Alright, moving on. Good. So I wanted to use something that would be emulating the idea of like a thrown weapon of sorts. But I also wanted something that would allow me to do forward-moving damage while moving closer to my enemy. I guess that's the idea of forward-moving damage now, isn't it? Come on, brain, work. But yeah, you'll notice that I chose not to pick up the dash arcanas that I typically use for that, because a lot of those, to me, emulate body blows, and that seems like something that I would want to save for either a barbarian or a monk build. Alright, so I like that, But it's also not going to be super useful until later in the run. So let's wait. Hello, Rocket. Alright, the mistake that I made there was not checking my cooldown timers. I just assumed I would be able to use Tunneling Drive, and I wasn't, so whoopsie poopsie. Always pay attention to your cooldowns. Alright, so getting back to what I was saying earlier, the best way to describe fighters, of course, is kind of the like your martial weapons and armor masters. And the easiest way to look at that is by looking at, well, basically the fighter class from the original Final Fantasy. They did not have many restrictions on what weapons or armor they could use, and their whole thing was that they were kind of the frontline tanky boys. Because there were options that are, sorry, I shouldn't say were, but in Final Fantasy there was the monk, which could do more physical damage later on in the game. And later on there are things like barbarians and berserkers that can definitely do more damage, but I would also argue they aren't as versatile in combat. And yes, I did pick that up because it's essentially a bow and arrow. And just because it's not necessarily a straight-up martial weapon doesn't mean that it's not something that you can use with a fighter. Archery is definitely something that fighters have been known to do, and traditionally there have been castes of knights that have been trained as archers. And one can even archer. Wow. Wee! 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 One can even argue that certain warriors like the samurai were actually trained as archers first and foremost, as the katana wasn't necessarily their primary weapon, but more of a status symbol. I say no to you. No, I don't want Fueled Berserk. That's not the right build for this. Save that for Berserk. But going back to the 5Es, to the 5th edition example, there are archer archetypes in 5th edition as well, so the idea of fighters using arrows is not an unprecedented one. Of course, them having terrible aim is is also not typical. I blame my controller on that one. I was clearly not aiming for that spot on the wall. So, all of that meaning to say that fighters are supposed to be versatile. They're your experienced, skillful, they're experienced, skillful, weapon-based martial fighters. Because that you won't necessarily find that balance with things like barbarians or you can knock that off. I would argue that monks are quicker, but not because they're monks. They're not necessarily 100% relegated to fighting. Though that is likely what you're going to be doing with a monk. I mean, you don't learn martial arts and then only use it to show off at a grill table. Well, we're definitely upgrading that. And even though it's not necessarily a weapon, I kind of want to take Dragon Dive. Again, you can always view it as this being sort of an Eldritch Knight thing. I don't know, I'm gonna think about that, because that kind of feels like cheating a little bit. Now, if I want it to be perfectly balanced about all of this, I would not suggest that the knight is the same thing as a fighter, because what people think of as a knight is a little bit closer to a paladin and not just a fighter. If I do decide to pick up one of those, I would rather have Dragon Dive. We'll just stand by and watch now, because that's funny. Ugh. Owie. Well, I like this. I also like the Singing Bowl, which, to me, kind of encapsulate that idea of battle maneuvers. Oh, 200. Can't afford that. Well, I guess we're gonna go with the other one, because I want to save some money. And again, I don't feel it's unprecedented to use something like that, as it kind of emulates... No, I got what I wanted. As it emulates the idea of thrown weapons, and again, you can base a fighter entirely around thrown weapons in D&D 5e. Like, it's not even that uncommon, with things like throwing knives and whatnot being a popular weapon choice just for their versatility in generalized combat. Well, I would argue that just the idea of range in general is typically a good thing for you to have in a fight. Oh, I hate elemental summoners so much. Yeah, that's what I thought. So, yeah, what we're going with here is someone who's battle hardened, just a combat tactician. And this, of course, differs from a barbarian, because a barbarian is all about raw strength and smashing. Now, I'm sure when I go to look up barbarians in D&D 5e and, you know, Dungeons and Dragons in general, and look them up, I will find things that prove that they're not necessarily all about smashing. But that is kind of the general idea, is that they're... I'm not going to say not sophisticated, but they definitely have them... They're definitely considered not from more openly civilized parts of the world. Like, I guess Wild Warrior is another way to look at what barbarians are, but on the whole, barbarians are not fighters. And I don't mean that as in they'd rather make love instead of war. No, they smash. They just don't do it the same way. I like Radiant Beat, but I'm a little disappointed that I can't get my basic upgraded. And Radiant Beat is kind of far down on the priority scale, as I'm also curious about other relics I can purchase. Now, as far as what I said about paladins earlier, the argument could be made that a paladin isn't always a knight. So it's kind of the whole a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't necessarily a square argument. And yeah, I can see that. Okay, I've got two things that work with signature charge. Let's grab that, as that seems like a nice layer of protection. Even though I'm not having a hard time at all. So, outside of the whole wild warrior thing, I think what sets a fighter apart from other martial classes is the idea that for them it's more about maneuvers, tactics. You know, making sound decisions in combat. Alright, because I'm... Oh, I can throw that at you, though. Four, five, six. There we go. I don't want that. So it really kind of boils down to a tactical approach to combat versus just using raw muscle and might. So hopefully I've gotten the point across, and because my memory is a little iffy, hopefully I haven't gotten the point across like 7 or 8 times. Because I know that's a bad habit of mine that I'm working on, and that is, not necessarily repeating myself when I'm trying to make a point. I'm pretty sure I did a really bad job at that this time around, but... Perfect, that's exactly what I wanted. Oh, what do we have here? I mean, more than likely I want the anchor. I mean, that's just seems like an easy choice for me personally to make. Wow, I'm dumb. Alright, mistakes were made. Fortunately, not crippling mistakes. That's what happens when a battle tactic goes wrong, though, is you can expect harsh retaliation. Hey, do something about that guy, would you? There you go. Turn my enemies against each other. That's a reasonable tactic. It's not, a typical tactic, but hey, propaganda works sometimes. Well, I mean, you can't be a good fighter without some armor. Now we just gotta find the end. No. Because that would actually take us further away from where we want to be. There we go, perfect. So one thing that I do want to talk about, as long as we're talking about just straight up fighters, is that there is a bit of a running joke in the D&D community that if you choose the fighter class, you're incredibly basic. And I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that, as the whole idea behind being a fighter is that you're supposed to be a tactician. You're supposed to have, you know, the education of warfare is supposed to be your thing. And because there's so many different ways to wage war, to handle the idea of warfare in general, it doesn't seem to me like it's being basic. I mean, so long as you're actually playing a tactical fighter. If you're just playing someone to, you know, swing a sword or a mace in someone's face, and you're not thinking about your battle tactics at all, then yeah, that's a little basic, I guess, but... I hate these rooms with restrictive spikes in the corners. Do you have anything I want? I kinda like the Cobalt Firestone, but for the most part I like what I have. So I might just stick with that and just keep picking up money to make the Dagger of Midas more imposing. Now, as far as who I think Bertram himself is, I see Bertram as someone who learned the combative arts at an early age and continued that through line into adulthood, where he became an adventurer, basically because partially because he needed to test himself, and partially because he wanted to really put what he learned to good use. And the only way he can think of to do that was on the battlefield. Which, I mean, your entire training and education is in the art of war. Of course that's the best place to put it to use. Bertram is a tactical prodigy. He obviously has quite a bit of strength in order to have the martial prowess that he has and to wear the heavier armor. But he would instead choose to focus that on bettering himself and finding ways to... Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and grab it now since the game is teasing me with it. But he would find ways to use that to better himself and to perfect his art rather than just being a martial bully. Because Lord knows there are plenty of people out there that learn to fight just because they want to push others around. Like, if this were a D&D character sheet that I were producing for this character, I would probably end up choosing him as either a battle master or a champion. Oh, that was a bad idea. There we go. Good fight. Alright, we've got swords. We've got all the swords. Well, not all of them, but most of them. We've got a lot of swords, is what I'm trying to get across here. Alright, that could have gone better. Shield. And I suppose if you want another good example of a fighter in popular media, you could also look at King Leonidas in 300. Which, yes, he's a real person, but I'm talking specifically about how he's portrayed in the movie 300. Owie. Oh, I got a little overzealous there. Yeah. Putting that shield to good use. And that, in and of itself, is a combat tactic. Weapon-to-shield style has been a very popular tactic throughout the course of history. Like, to the point where even nowadays, tactical FBI agents and whatnot will I guess I should say tactical officers, will often be seen using riot shields. Like, it's still a popular tactic even today. So never discount the idea of just putting a giant slab of material between you and your enemy. It's more effective than you realize. But folks, I think that's going to do it for our first class-based build. So say goodbye to Bertram the Fighter. Wish him well on his endeavors to become the very best, like no one ever was. And next time we do one of our class builds, we'll be moving in a different direction now that we've talked about fighters. Which direction are we moving? I don't know. Why don't you drop me a comment and let me know what you'd be interested in seeing as far as that's concerned. In the meantime, I will thank you for stepping in and spending some of your free time with me here today. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic day or night wherever you may happen to be, and I will catch you in the next one. My name is Dark Sage Walker, and you take care, everybody.